Thanks everyone for tuning in to this Stardom discussion, a review of Stardom's first 6 months under Stardom President Taro Okada. That's right. This is a performance review of Stardom's newest president. His first 6 months on the job have not been easy. And a lot has happened in those 6 months, which is why I have once again put out a call for assistance. And there was someone out there, someone qualified enough, someone courageous enough to enter this discussion. Back from our review of All Star Grand Queendom from Talk for Glory, my guest is Enigma V4. Enigma V4, how is your day going so far?
Jason, first off, thank you so much for having me back on Red Belt Radio. I had a first fun time, but I'm also doing really good, my man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're 2 for 2. We met in person in Philadelphia, had a good talk. We met online to talk about All Star Grand Queendom. So let's hope that third time is not the anti-charm, and we just continue the streak.
To follow up on what you said, yes, this is a 6 month review on President Okada. It has not been easy from people who may or may not be leaving the American tour. A lot of things that Okada had to take care of. I'll say he did good, he did bad, he did so so. He did good Monday, but he did bad Tuesday, he did so so Wednesday. And that's how we're going to be looking at these next 6 months.
And no one could be expected to nail everything because there's a lot of chaos that factors in to this whole situation. The man of the hour, Mr. Taro Okada. So who is this guy? Who is he? Well, I did a little bit of research, and by that I mean I went to his Twitter account and I looked at what was there. And this is how Taro Okada sort of summarizes his own position or his own background. He is a Bushiroad guy. He's a company man. He spent 10 years with Bushiroad thus far, and he does have some background in running live performance. So he's done theater shows and anime themed like live performances. He also is one of the producers of Mayu Iwatani's semi biopic. I've been calling it a biopic, but actually, I guess it's loosely based on her life. Runaway Wrestler. And he claims to be a lover and a big fan of pro wrestling itself. We're going to be talking about how we feel he's been doing. And the main way we're going to do that is by looking at Stardom and where it is at, what has been going on, how we think it's been going. I'm going to actually be scoring Taro Okada. I'm going to give him a score out of 10 in these past 6 months. And I'm going to base that off of 5 categories that we're going over. I will give each of the categories anywhere between a score of 0, 1, or 2, with 0 being non existent or bad, 1 being average or good, and 2 being very good or exceptional, depending on how I think that specific category scores. I'll go over what the categories are, but before I do that, I do want to talk a little bit about what Stardom was, where it found itself when Taro Okada took up the mantle. So we have to go back because Taro Okada's presidency started at the beginning of December of 2023. He was inheriting a Stardom that had a very injured roster, a lot of beaten up wrestlers. And so these injuries also facilitated 2 vacant titles, the Red Belt and the Goddess of Stardom tag belts had to be relinquished by their champions. There was also a big year-ending event on the horizon, Stardom Dream Queendom, for being the thing that closes the year in a hell of a way. That was something he was going to need to put into motion. You also had, which we didn't even know about, but it was going on, you had Rossy Ogawa, at the time, the executive producer, being dissatisfied with the state of Stardom and a lot of wrestlers who were similarly unhappy. So that's not a comfortable position to enter into. I can't imagine how he was feeling. He did make some public statements and he seemed extremely nervous at the time. But I mean, how would you feel if someone put you in charge of a wrestling company And all of that was in need of repair, my friend.
For Okada to look at the state of Stardom, I can promise you that he walked in this with fear, maybe a little bit of hesitation, definitely some doubt, and a lot of hopefulness in himself, Bushiroad, and the Stardom roster themselves. Because if I had to rate or give the percentage of confidence to doubt on Okada's shoulders, I would say he was about like 30 to 40% confident, and then he was about 60 to 70% more so uneased.
I also want to bring up the fact that President Okada was in attendance of WrestleMania weekend in April of this year, and he was ringside, almost in that Rossy Ogawa position of old. He also was present for the meet and greets that occurred and struck me as an extremely humble guy. I actually got to meet him for a brief amount of time. He was incredibly polite, and he even went as far as assisting and helping out with some of the meet and greet stuff. There was a time where I saw him taking a knee, holding somebody's camera and helping take the picture for that fan and the wrestler at the time. I don't remember who it was. It might have been Mai Sarah. So I've got, at least personally, a sense that this is a pretty good guy who's just trying to do the best he can. So we're going to find out if we think he's been doing well or not. All right, our 5 categories. The first of which is going to be the state of the Stardom factions and the Stardom roster over this 6-month Taro Okada presidency. We are next going to talk about Stardom titles, the belt picture, the champions, and the title changes that have happened. We'll also talk about Stardom pay-per-views, the big events and tournaments, followed by storylines in the past 6 months. And lastly, we'll talk about this just general fan experience as a viewer of Stardom, someone attending their shows. How are the people being treated in this time? So our first category is going to be the Stardom factions and roster, which is always a very critical piece of the puzzle if we're looking at Stardom. Stardom is a faction-based wrestling company in my eyes, and I think seeing and kind of sussing out where everyone is, where people are positioned, and how healthy these factions are is pretty important. So do you have any just general thoughts on the factions or the roster of Stardom over these past 6 months?
When it comes to Stardom and factions, you hit the nail around the hammer. That it's something that just comes with the territory. People come to Stardom and you think, oh, where will this person go? I think the best example that we talked about previously in person and on the last episode was Crazy Stars. So when we look at the factions, I believe the least impacted was Oedo Tai. If we go through all of them, Enex's V wasn't damaged. God's Eye lost someone. Cosmic Angels didn't lose anyone. Oedo Tai gained someone. I guess they broke even. They broke even from our mini rant on the last episode. Queen's Quest was the biggest blow. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually still to this day very shocked at that. When Utami Hayashishita decided I'm leaving Stardom, a lot of people were shocked. It kind of was a no-brainer to a lot of fans where, oh, Giulia may be leaving, that's fine, we have Utami. But to see Utami leaving a faction leader, that caught eyes, that caught ears. That's a faction leader, that's someone that's held the goddess artist world. She's won the 5-star. Utami Hayashishita is a very decorated wrestler.
I'm going to just give my quick sort of take on the factions in the roster and give it a score. So, huge elephant in the room clearly is that the roster was a little bit butchered initially from injuries, but then from the departures that you brought up. That is already climbing uphill. But what I do like about the state of the roster and the factions right now, if we look at them, we have 6 different factions and they all have at least 5 or 6 members apiece. And most of them have 6 members. So it's a fairly healthy amount of people. And most of the factions have some kind of belt or have been challenging for belts. And even in our, let's say, unaffiliated category, we've got I would say like a low, I guess we have like not many people who are unaffiliated right now. We've got Rion, who's brand new, and all of our other rookies are teamed up with somebody. They have a unit to work with. And we've got Starlight Kid, who is playing this game of figuring out where she's going to go. So her not being in a faction is kind of a cool thing right now. And, Crazy Star, that's just what they're used to.
Yeah, that's one of the cool parts about Crazy Stars and Starlight Kid and Rihanna, where we don't know where they'll end up. I have grown now, again, due to Crazy Stars. I'm okay with Rihanna and Starlight Kid not being in a faction for another 3 months.
So to summarize my thoughts on the faction and the factions and the roster overall, I'm actually going to give them the full 2 points on this category because all the factions are pretty well populated right now, and even the people that aren't in factions are holding their own, and they're still very interesting characters in the overall scheme of things. So that's 2 points for you, Mr. Okada, in our first category. We're going to go ahead and move on to our second category. So the second category we've got the Stardom title picture, the champions, the challengers, the title matches, and the lineage of these belts. So please take it away. Let me know your thoughts on what you've been thinking about the various titles in Stardom the past 6 months.
So in the past 6 months, when we look at the championships in Stardom, not just the champions, it's been a bumpy ride, a shocking one at that as well. When we look at a title like the High Speed Championship, and that's a funny ladder to climb, where we go from high speed to slow speed to flight speed, where it's not something that, oh, this is Saya's goal. When we think of the high speed title, we think of Queen's Quest, we're automatically going to think of Izumi. Like that's just the automatic brain wiring. So to see Saya with it, it's piqued curiosity, but it's also sending alarms to the brain of this is new, this is not the norm. Mixture of I don't know how to react, but I'm also curious. And then when it comes to the Artists of Stardom Championships, where we started off with very bombers, which is Thekla, Mai Sakurai, and Giulia, I for one was already begging for the belts to get off them. Giulia already had a full plate, if you will. So it was very bombers. It was God's Eye, and then it was Eden X's V, which I genuinely believe the history of the Artists of Stardom Championships from December to now have been tainted. They have not been earned. Now I can say that for the Goddess titles with Aphrodite and Crazy Stars, but this is twice. We obviously need to get the belts off of DDM because Giulia is not staying. So we give it to God's Eye. But now we need to get it off of God's Eye because Mirai's not staying. So I'll say that about the Artists of Stardom Championships. They have been tainted. ENXSV didn't feel earned. God's Eye didn't feel earned. Kind of just feels like a situational transition.
I'll actually just run the gauntlet here, and I'll give you my take on all the belt pictures, and I'll culminate it in the red and white belts. Starting with New Blood tag belts, I'm fine with the state that they're in because we have the New Blood series coming back into the fold. It's been on hiatus, and I think that's going to be a great stage to showcase that belt. We've got two fan favorite wrestlers in Saya Ida and Hanan, and so I'm looking forward to that arc or that legacy continuing in the New Blood series where I think it's going to be able to shine. The future of Stardom title, I've already said I'm extremely happy with what Rina's been doing. Really like her matches. I like her aura. I like her trash talk. And I like this story of her trying to conquer Hanan's title run and to see if she can actually usurp her older sister. Artist belts, you summarized that pretty well. These wins and these title changes have not felt earned. There's not a lot of story really happening in the Artists of Stardom picture. And I think sometimes it feels like just cobbled together trios of people. And I think it's probably the weakest title going on right now in terms of, my interest or it making much sense. High speed belts you talked about, I think it's opened up quite a bit with the particular champion and the particular matchups that are in place. So I'm cool with that. And the goddess belts have been presenting some of the best matches we've seen this year. What's crazy is just how talented the various tag teams are. They're putting out Great, great, great wrestling. It's a little bit light on story, but they're making up for it with just pure skill everywhere you look. So I'm cool with that title picture. The transition of the reigns have been shorter, which isn't the best, but I do understand why they would want FWC to get a win in their hometown, which they've been trying to do for a few years now, and finally getting it. I can kind of understand why they made that choice. So now let's talk about the red and the white belts. Full disclosure, Maika and Saori Ano are two of my absolute favorite wrestlers. Saori Ano has taken on the mantle of white belt champion, and she feels like an end boss now. The way she's been able to incorporate her theatricality, her entrances, her promos with these various challengers, and each challenger now has some kind of story or some kind of gripe or some kind of history with Saori Ano, and she's embellishing that. And the matches are getting rather intense. We have to say that, particularly this one with Ami Sourei, the one prior to that, which was against Hanan, so good. I think that belt is in a good place. And we almost have like small, like short episodic plots. And then we have the long-term plot, which is Saori Ano and Natsupoi, which they continually remind us of and continually get closer to, but they're not letting us have it just yet. And I think that's like killing some people as fans. But to me, when it actually hits and takes place, it's going to make it all the bigger. Now on to Maika, red belt champion of Stardom. Her matches have just been consistently quite good. Each of these title matches, I can't really criticize in terms of quality. And the only thing that has been lacking in just the near term, and she mentioned this, is that we don't really know what the queue is looking like, or no one's really stepping up. They haven't really built a story or any type of heat between Maika and anybody else. She's gone through the people that had the most like intense, high temperature feuding with her. So it's in a little bit of a lull, but it's a very short lull. We're not that far removed from All-Star Grand Queendom, where we just saw, the most grueling, exhausting match. I can't think of a red belt title match that went that long since we saw Utami Hayashishita and Shuri. And then maybe there was like one somewhere, but people really should appreciate just how difficult and how grindy and how just bone crushing that match was. If I'm going to score the overall belt picture, because of the things that are pulling this down a little bit, I'm only going to score this as a good. I'm going to give it 1 point out of a possible 2, because like you were saying, some of these changes haven't made a lot of sense. They haven't really felt earned. And in a couple of these, the story just doesn't exist, in my opinion. So that's where I'm at on red and white, and that's where I'm at kind of across the board.
I see Maika's challengers being the physically tougher opponents, while Sorei's opponents are the younger, hungrier talent coming. So again, I feel as though Maika is facing the physically stronger opponents within Saya, Utami, Megan Bain, Momo, while Sorey faces the young uprising stars. But my final comments, and this is on the future Stardom Championship. I love the fact that when it comes to Rina, you can sort of sense that the collision course with Hina is coming, but Rina's really sticking to the gimmick, the theme of the future of Stardom Champion, while one, showing that, hey, I'm trying to break Hanan's record, and two, this is a future of Stardom Championship, so the future will be coming for me.
So let's go ahead and move over to our third category, the Stardom pay-per-views, the big events, as well as the tournaments. So we've had a number of pay-per-views and a couple of tournaments. We had the Triangle Derby, which was a bit truncated. Last year, it had gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks. They decided to condense that a whole hell of a lot. And then we also, of course, had the Cinderella tournament, along with an entire slew of pay-per-views, and even half pay-per-views are what I'm calling them. I don't know. They basically do this thing where they're like, hey, we've got a big show at Korakuen Hall or something. We're putting a belt or two on the line, and you can pay half the price of a normal pay-per-view. They've been doing that quite a lot, which we can discuss if needed. But any takeaways with the sort of overall schedule or the pay-per-view schedule that we've seen?
The pay-per-view schedule has really improved, especially from doing it where there was a pay-per-view like the first week, and then apparently another pay-per-view was announced the following Sunday. While under these 6 months, I've seen there's a new pay-per-view the beginning of the first week of whatever new month. And it's just enough time and space for rest and that worry of someone might get injured to just get lower by the day. So I think they looked at the 5 star and thought, okay, less time, more rest. And I'm glad to see that that is something that was taken into accounting.
I've been really happy with the pay-per-views and in terms of quality. These main pay-per-views that I'm considering more so than the half pay-per-views have all at the very least to me been good or better. I haven't seen a bad show since Taro Okada has taken over. And there have been a number of these shows that I thought were actually just stellar. And as far as these two tournaments, I really liked the condensed Triangle Derby because to me, as I said, the artist picture right now is not super strong or super intriguing. So I don't need to go through weeks and weeks of these trios facing each other to build up to that personally. And then the Cinderella, I mean, I think it's night and day what we had this year versus last year. I can't even compare the 2023 Cinderella, though. I mean, there are really good matches in the 2023 Cinderella, but as a tournament in its entirety, something for us to watch and be invested in, this was just so much better. I have to, for my scoring, have to give the pay-per-views and tournaments a 2, the full 2 points being either very good or exceptional. It's time to look at what our next category is. Looks like the storylines of the past 6 months in Stardom. To me, when President Okada entered the scene, one of the big stories was just simply the story of the rivalry of Maika and Suzuki. This was something that began as them as allies. When Maika was coming off of her separation from Himeka, we had Suzuki, who was newly signed to Stardom exclusively, and they began as a tag team. They began kind of having some fun, getting in the mix, and that kind of fell apart with the generational struggle when they failed to overthrow the old guard, the elder stateswomen of the generational struggle. And then Suzu and Maika began to not see eye to eye. We know that Suzuki won the 2023 5-star Grand Prix by defeating Maika in the finals, but that ended up not being the end of that story. And when Taro Okada entered the picture, we had Suzuki waiting to challenge for the red belt, but unfortunately Tam Nakano needing to vacate. And so the cultivated rivalry between Maika and Suzuki was allowed to continue, them facing off in the finals of the Goddess Tag League and then facing off for one climactic final showdown, at least to this point, in Stardom Dream Queendom. After that, we had a number of other stories to look at. Most of them actually surrounded the fact that a number of wrestlers were going to be leaving the company. So we had all of these heartfelt goodbyes that needed to happen. We had these send-offs. We had a DDM reunion. We had a number of other types of rare team-ups or rare matches to really give people a chance to take their final bow. We had a lot of things that at least we as fans could look at and feel something about. Now, to me, what is going on currently in Stardom, if we're looking at like, what is the story being told in Stardom? And I'm going to say something that's maybe kind of bold. Hopefully it'll make sense. Who is the main character of Stardom right now? Like in this arc, I would look straight down the barrel of that gun and fire it into the unaffiliated section of the roster. And I would say that Starlight Kid is currently the main character of the biggest story, which is the falling out that happened between her and Oedo Tai. And now this period of time in which she is teaming up with various people, all of whom seem to either be vying for her attention and her allegiance. If we're talking about Tam Nakano, Mayu Iwatani, most recently Maika and Mina, or the people that don't want her to join, like Hazuki, who has been harboring this grudge and showing outwardly that she would rather reject Starlight Kid for her past transgressions. It's drawn so much interest because Starlight Kid has teased all of these different things. Oh, maybe I'll learn the Cosmic Angels dance. Oh, maybe I'll team up with Natsupoi. Oh, maybe I'll take my mask off. And then out of nowhere, she shows up and she's wearing her old gear. She's turned to the light side. And she and Natsupoi are like one of the best tag teams we've seen. So many things going on with her. And there's still the untold conclusion of what she's going to actually do, what choice she's going to make. She's been allowed to navigate pretty much all of the factions that she wants to, and even some of the unaligned people like Crazy Star she's teamed up with. And she still has the feuding going on with her former faction. So that to me is kind of like the main crux of the drama going on. Of course, we talked about Thekla previously. She's stirring up plenty of storylines right now. So I am looking at the current and recent past of Stardom storylines, and I'm kind of liking it.
As I've watched Stardom these last 6 months, I actually did think that there was a solo main character in Stardom, and I did just think it's probably just the red or white belt. But in these last 6 months, Stardom has become a ensemble cast of main characters. I was under the impression that with Marigold on the rise and people leaving, that Mayu would once again become the main character. I was under the impression that Azumi might become the main character. Starlight Kid might become the main character. But as the months are going by, no, it's actually a group thing. It's not a solo. I think we have multiple stories from where is Starlight Kid going to be? Who's going to lead Queen's Quest? It's still leaderless. Where is Mayu mentally, emotionally? Again, where is Starlight Kid going to be? Is Crazy Stars going to join a team already? There's so many things going on. It's not just a solo thing. No one's just sitting here waiting for who's the big star that's going to beat Micah. There's so many side quests. There's one straight tunnel and everyone's going through it. And I think that's one of the great things about Stardom right now, how there are so many things to focus on, and you can either choose to focus on that one thing, or you can choose everything.
If I'm going to score this, again, 0 being pretty bad, 1 being average or just pretty good, 2 being very good or exceptional, I'm giving them another 2 points for Stardom storylines. All right, let's knock out our very last category, which is a pretty vague one. Like, I don't have a clear sense of what this even truly means, but the Stardom fan experience. That doesn't even sound good. What Stardom has been and meant to its fandom, and how we've been able to go along this journey. Where have the bumps in the road been in our viewership or our rooting for the various characters and the various factions? How has the production been? How has the communication, the lines of communication between Stardom and the fans, how clear have those communications been? How helpful have they been? How accurate have they been? But for you being a fan of Stardom, I'm curious if you've noticed things changing, or do you feel like it's what kind of a place it's in right now? There's definitely a lot of ways you can go about it, but what is your take?
My take on this is it's kind of funny how we're getting these fast uploads, which I'm personally loving, but we're not getting translation. That's actually something I'm noticing. Fast uploads is something that's been like universally argued for, where an event would happen on Sunday and we wouldn't find out until 9 days from now. And it would suck because one of my personal gripes with Stardom, I guess, is I follow them on Twitter. So I get spoiled immediately after matches go. And I'm just like, damn it. They just start right there. And I personally I don't have a problem with it, because I used to think, all right, tweet it out today, the match comes out tomorrow. That was my mentality when I was first getting into Stardom World. And then when I saw, oh, you guys don't upload in comparison to something like New Japan World. So it's not the next day or 30 minutes after the show. So if you want to get spoiled, just make a Twitter account and bam. If you want to see the match, you might have to wait 10 business days. But the production has gotten so much better in these 6 months at the cost of translation. So now I'll turn the question to you. Would you rather late updates, but perfect productions, so translations and all, broken down matches, just late uploads, or would you have immediate uploads, rushed, no translations? You're basically seeing it live in a sense.
I think the further you pull at the strings of this, my my answer will change because like there's a certain degree of lateness that I think would just be completely unmanageable. Like, you know, if we're talking like months late or something. But if we're talking about like kind of what they had where it could be anywhere from 3, 4 to maybe like 8, 9 days, I think I would most often go for the later upload with the full production, like editing between the different angles and the translations. And this is another thing that we've lost is the sectioning out or the separating out of individual matches that you can access. Right now, if they live stream something, you have a whole like 2 hour chunk of one video file that you've got to fast forward and rewind through to figure out, you know, who was in this show and where is that match. So I think the whole kit and caboodle, the well sort of curated and organized and translated late production is my preference, but it's not actually to me that much worse or better either way. I understand the trade-offs. One thing I do appreciate that they've been doing is that although they're not translating the in-ring promos that happen after a match, they are translating a lot of the backstage promos. You mentioned being on social media, following them on Twitter and stuff. Their English Stardom account is translating a lot of the stuff when the wrestlers go backstage after a match is over and talk to the cameras. But yeah, to answer your question, I'd go for basically what we had last year, though I understand the model for this year, and I think it has its own benefits. I just think it's slightly not as good.
If I had to put what we have now in a sentence, I would call this rushed. It's a rushed upload, and I love that Stardom's new goal is let's get it out, let's have them watch it. But the no translation, I'm not the biggest fan of. Again, I'm one of those people that I guess if I get off social media and don't look at results, I'm kind of okay with all right, this match happened on the 2nd, but it came out on Stardom World on the 9th. Perfectly fine. It's broken down, has English translation, and I'm going to enjoy a show. I do enjoy both sides, especially the English translations on social media now that you brought that up.
I think the things that you said are well said, and it all ties into this issue that Stardom is having, I think, just with timing and keeping up with things. I think for Mr. Okada and this new era, they're still getting into their groove and their flow so that they can manage the calendar, plan for these events, and put together these cards and promote them and release them. There's a lot of things they have to take care of, but I have not yet felt like they're really hitting their stride with all of the scheduling. We'll get these very late announcements as to who's going to be at what event, what match is going to be there. And that's just adding to a little bit of the jarring nature or sort of the disjointed nature of everything. So on this topic of the fan experience, now one caveat actually before I jump into that, me as a fan, as an American fan that speaks English and watches this stuff from a distance, my personal experience has been fantastic because I got to go to WrestleMania weekend, meet 12 wrestlers from Stardom, see them wrestle live. My personal experience has been through the roof. It's been better than ever. But if we take into account the average experience, it's a lot to ask, and it is a lot of sort of tripping over the schedule that I just don't think they've found a way to chart out ahead of time well enough. So I'm just going to give them a 1 on this, kind of average to good in terms of the fan experience overall. We're still getting great wrestling, great performances. It's still Stardom, but the presentation of it all and the packaging of it all and the promotion of it all is not quite at a stellar level yet. So I'm going to just summarize my thoughts on all of these categories. I've given the factions and the roster a 2 out of 2. I've given the title picture a 1 out of 2, the Stardom pay-per-views and tournaments a 2 out of 2, the Stardom storylines a 2 out of 2, the Stardom fan experience a 1 out of 2. And that's going to give Mr. Okada overall for these past 6 months, his first 6 months in this position as president, a rather respectable total score of 8 out of 10 from me, which I'm grading a little bit on a curve also because he got into this position maybe at one of the worst times a person possibly could. You have people not yet ready to return to the regular roster. And then you, just within a few months of starting up, have a bunch of people who are getting ready to leave. There's going to be all this controversy. There's going to be all of these paradigm shifts inside of the factions, inside of your events, your champions. You have champions leaving, you have faction leaders leaving. That is so much to contend with and to account for. But pretty damn good job as far as I'm concerned. And I definitely would not have been able to do better than he did.
It's funny that you graded him an 8 because as we were talking, I mentally was telling myself, Okada's getting a 6. Like if I had to grade him, he's getting a 6. But your last selling point here where he came in December, which is the worst time. Because like we started with, he's wrapping up stories, Dream Queendom's right there, and people are potentially leaving. So for him to, I guess, not crack under the pressure in his first month, his first 30 days, that girl is not a respect out of me. So 8 out of 10 definitely sounds just deserved. And then on top of that, he really is a people person. He really catered to fans, whether it was in Japan or in America. Because I did see him during the Stardom Philly show, and he looked so into it along with the fans. You definitely give him the smart rating.
For your ultimate sort of judging, if you could pull out like one or two of the biggest, let's say the biggest pitfalls or flaws in what you've seen in the last 6 months, what would you name as being kind of like the biggest detractors?
The biggest detractors in my eyes is, well, in sense of championships. I think you said it best that out of all of them, the weakest was like the artist. That needed to get straightened immediately. Now, it was uncertain if whether Giulia and Mirai had told Okada that they would be leaving. But I think just to be like on the safe side, if he had the foresight to ask anyone like, hey, who's leaving, who's staying, I think we could have walked around the artist championship situation a lot better. And then as when it comes to like something non-championship related, I would have said not to shotgun the uploads. It's appreciated, but at the same time, if you're going to shotgun them with no translations and no ways of breaking them apart, because there are fans that just want to see their favorite wrestler and not the whole show. And there are people that buy Stardom World just specifically for that. I enjoy watching the 5-6 matches that are provided, but maybe there's someone that just wants to watch a Ronnie Agami match, and now they've got to fast forward to 21 minutes and 50 seconds. So those are like the two negatives, but as like the positives, I've loved the effort he's put in, especially from December to now. The Stardom show in Philly, really got to see who he was. He was a fan. He wasn't just someone that worked there that ran it. He was a fan. Even at WrestleCon, he was a fan. He loved meeting people. I know he bumped into a couple people like just walking around, or he was going on the way upstairs. He would say hi to people. He would direct people to where the Stardom wrestlers are. Like he was a people person.
Well, I think we've given Mr. Okada enough of either a hard time or enough praise. We don't want to overdo one or the other. And I think for most of the categories and general sense, we tend to see pretty much eye to eye. And maybe, I value something a little bit more than you would, or you look at a flaw a little bit harsher than I would. And other than that, we're pretty much on the same page, which is kind of an interesting takeaway from this. This guy seems like a good guy. So I definitely wish him all the best. It's only in our benefit if he does well. So I commend him for what he's been trying to do and put together. But as far as this topic is concerned, I think we've pretty much covered it. And I'm curious if you've got anything you'd like to tell the people. Please let them know where they can go amongst the various internet channels in order to find more of you.
You guys can follow myself on my wrestling podcast, Talk for Glory. So TALKFOR. It's not the number 4. And then Glory, GLORY, Talk for Glory, where you guys can find any forms of wrestling, whether it's WWE, AEW, New Japan, Stardom. I just finished doing a review for Flashing Champions, where the main event actually has a interesting take. And just in case, maybe, just maybe, I'll bring Marigold onto the Talk for Glory miniseries, which is on Spotify and YouTube. And if you guys are just looking for that one-on-one talk conversations, you guys can follow my Twitter. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep calling it Twitter. I don't know how people adjusted to X, but at Enigma underscore V4 underscore. You guys can follow me on my Instagram at Enigma period V4. Those are like my main two. My Discord is linked into pretty much all my social media. So if you guys want to get even further of those one-on-ones, maybe I'm a bad texter on Instagram or Twitter, I'm definitely good on Discord as well. Or you just want to be in a space where we have a bunch of wrestling fans, a Discord, Twitter, those are the perfect places where you'll meet a lot of wrestling fans. And maybe you guys will differ, maybe you guys will see eye to eye. But most of all, you guys will have a discussion about wrestling. And that's the goal here.
Speaking of discussions about wrestling, I think this has been quite an enjoyable one as far as I'm concerned. So we're 3 for 3, at least in our chats. So thank you as always. And thanks everyone for listening.